I just found out that my father baby trapped my mother with me. I, 18M, grew up thinking my mother, 40F, had abandoned us. That is what he always told me. He told me my mother packed up and left us when I turned 2 years old. I grew up resenting and hating her, mainly because I saw how my father, 42M, was working super long hours to make ends meet. I hated how my grandma basically had to raise me. When I would ask her about my mother, my grandma painted a picture of a bitter, spiteful, hateful, spoiled, and entitled woman. I felt very justified in my anger and hate for her. That's what my family told me, and I had absolutely no reason to doubt them. A few weeks ago, I found her on social media while at my boyfriend's house, and I was furious. She was out there living her best life. She's a chef in a Michelin star restaurant. She travels, has a huge apartment, and apparently is married to a gorgeous man. In a fit of rage, I DM'd her, cursing her out for abandoning me to live her frivolous life and that karma would come to her. She obviously saw it, but instead of going off on me, she just asked me to meet her and that she felt like I had a right to express my anger to her in person, and that she owed me as much. I was starstruck because my father said she never stood for the consequences of her actions without telling anyone. I agreed. She invited me to this amazing restaurant. She paid for an Uber for me and everything. It was awkward at the beginning. I kept berating her because I was so angry. I even cried a little. She just sat there and took it all in. I then asked her why she abandoned me. She said, "Do you really want to know the whole story? It's not nice, and you're definitely not going to like it. I've come to terms with being painted as the bad person in your life forever, and I'll just keep my distance." I just kept pressing her for the truth, and then she told me her side of the story. This is paraphrased to the best of my recollection. She told me that my father and her met shortly before graduating from university. At that time, my mother had said she didn't want to stay in that town forever. A few months after dating, my father told her that his landlord was evicting him because the apartment was needed for immediate family use. She offered him to stay at her place while he found something else. Months passed, and he wasn't doing anything. Then she got a job offer in another country, and she told my father that he could take over her apartment or come with her. They had this huge fight where my mother told him that she was not ready for the type of commitment he wanted. She wanted different things in life than him, and as much as she loved him, they weren't compatible. They stayed living together, and then one day she found out she was pregnant. She told me honestly that she was thinking of not having me. She didn't feel ready to be a mom at 22, and she didn't feel maternal feelings. She said she was already struggling with depression. My father convinced her to have me. He said he would take me because he had a right to me, that he would go after her because the baby was also his. So she had me. She said that the time after birth was really bad. My father was dragging out the legal procedures. He refused to vacate the home. My mother said that while she felt love for me and that there were moments when she felt overjoyed, it was overshadowed by huge waves of suicidal ideation. She was scared that she was going to do something she'd regret. She also showed me some of the court documents at that time that backed up her claims. In the end, she was so desperate that she agreed to stay with my father if he agreed to be the main caretaker. He did, but only half-heartedly. My mother then told me that it got so bad that she tried to delete herself around my second birthday after a particularly nasty fight where my father admitted to having tampered with her birth medications. She showed me the papers of the involuntary 72-hour commitment and the legal documents where she was found unfit to be a parent. Afterward, I felt nauseous. After all that, I would not have believed her hadn't she brought so much evidence with her. She then asked me what I meant in my message that we were struggling. I told her that we were not exactly rich and that I was struggling to come up with the money to go to university in another city. She was bewildered and asked me what my father had been doing with a monthly payment she was making. I told her that we don't receive that money. Then she took out another stack of papers. Guys, she's sending child support every month. It amounts to almost $3,000. She's court mandated to pay $1,500, but she doubled the payments out of her own will. She doesn't have to pay that amount, but she does because she wants to. She was very concerned about this and told me she would talk to her lawyer ASAP to transfer the money to me directly. In the end, she apologized to me. She was very sorry to have put me through this, for not being stronger, and for letting me grow up the way I did. She was crying by the end, and so was I. She then told me to take my time. She would contact me again regarding the payments, and it was up to me if I wanted to see her again, that she couldn't be the mother I wanted, but the least she could do is help me with anything I needed. I hugged her while I cried, and she did too. I boxed up my food, and she got me another Uber home. At home, my father wasn't there, so I went straight to bed and left early the next morning to stay with my boyfriend. My whole life is a lie. Update 1. After the post yesterday, I went snooping around because I don't trust my father anymore, and I found records of the harm perpetrated by my father toward my mother. He was charged but never ended up going to jail or had a significantly reduced sentence. This would have been when I was 2 after my mother was committed. I also found a restraining order filed by my mother against my father. It was much worse than what she said. I feel so disgusted I could just scream. I went back to my boyfriend after that, and my father has been calling a lot, asking why I was spending so much time away from home. For now, my excuse is that there's a family emergency with my boyfriend. After yesterday's events, I wanted to confront him, but now I don't feel safe. Update 2. I decided to go home for a while because I wanted to retrieve my legal documents and all that. My father came back home, and we talked a bit. I just asked him, "By the way, did mom never send you child support for me?" My father scoffed theatrically and went on this rant about how the courts are always accessible to the mother and how they told him he couldn't expect anything from her and so on. He pulled the whole story of him begging her for money when he didn't have enough money for my school supplies and her turning him down. I know this is a lie. My mother kept itemized records of all her money wires to my father every month since she had a job, meaning for over 15 years she has sent my father money. In the beginning, she sent him $400, then $600, then $11,000, and eventually $3,000. Then he kept talking, saying how hard it was, that he wished he would have gone after her more, but that the courts were not in his favor. He told me how even now we were barely able to go paycheck to paycheck. His rant was surreal. After he left to God knows where, I went snooping through his room where I found a stack of cash in a sock drawer. It was over $55,000 crammed into the back of his drawer. Things are getting worse, and I feel so weird. I cannot describe the egg. I have all my documents and wrote to my mother so we could maybe meet again. Update 3. I told my mother about everything monetarily that I had found out. She said that legally there was not much we could do, but she spoke with her lawyer, and seeing as I'm 18, she started the motion to begin transferring me my child's support money. She said that for the time being, she would give me $1,500 monthly while she still had to pay my dad. As soon as the process is greenlit, I'm going to get it all. She also agreed to pay for my school fees and helped me relocate to an apartment in my university's town so that I could be as independent as possible. We decided that confronting my father was not a good idea, so we settled on telling my father that my boyfriend's parents invited me on a vacation. He doesn't know that he's my boyfriend, so we plan on telling him that they're moving. And this is to say goodbye to my friend. I have talked to my boyfriend and his parents. They didn't even hesitate and immediately said yes. They now know everything and completely support me. So my mother and his parents are sending us for 2 weeks to a nearby country where they have a summer house. I told my father about the plans, and he said that as long as his parents were paying, it was all right. So on Thursday, I'm officially leaving for 2 weeks, and I pray things get resolved beforehand. I am taking all important stuff with me already in case things go south fast. Update 4. Things went as fast on Wednesday night, the night before I left. My father picked a fight with me for not taking his car for an oil change. He called me everything under the sun, saying I'm selfish and a brat, that he raised me better. He then had my grandmother come and say how disappointed they were that I wasn't mature enough to leave for a holiday, let alone move away for university. They kept me awake until 4 a.m., under the guise of a family meeting, basically just a reprimanding session of all I'd done wrong in my life. To be honest, I was demoralized. I was ugly, crying and feeling awful. Thankfully, my boyfriend called because I hadn't answered several texts of his. He helped me transport all my stuff while my father was sleeping, and I left without telling him bye. He texted me around 1 p.m. and my father was acting like everything was normal. The 2 weeks passed very quickly. and I got an email that I got into a university with a great political science program. Then things really blew up. My mother suddenly stopped giving my father half the money, so she was only paying what she was legally obligated to pay. My father lost it. He began screaming at me to come home at once, then calling me crying to tell me that my mother had reappeared and was suing him, and now we didn't have enough money to pay for the mortgage. I called my mother to ask if she was actually suing him. She said no and said that she had just gone through the courts to start paying me directly instead of my father, which was granted. Then my grandma started texting me, saying I had to come home right away because my father had a cardiac arrest. Obviously, I went back home with my boyfriend, only to find our house in literal shambles. There were beer cans, string liquor stuff, and cigarettes everywhere. Everyone that was betting that my father was using all the money on illegal substances and lavish stuff. Congratulations, you were right. Apparently, when I left, my father decided to have a huge party, and he invited all these friends that he made in fancy bars. I know that because the lady that was in the hospital with my dad was his girlfriend, apparently, and she didn't know about me. She kept talking about our house as a summer residence. Apparently, my father would take the child's support and spend it on appearing richer. He had bought some clothing pieces that were high quality, and he would hang out in these fancy hotel sky lounges. That's where he met her. Then he would take her and her friends out to expensive restaurants and clubs. She didn't fully admit it, but insinuated that they regularly ingested illegal substances during those outings, much like the party that landed my dad in the hospital. I thanked her and told her that the money wasn't my father's and she had been lied to. She stayed until my father woke up, which is when she left him for good, and then I broke it to him that I was leaving as well. He lost his temper and broke my nose. I was terrified. He wasn't even fully recovered in the hospital. I told the nurse how it happened, and the police got involved. My mother took me in the very next day while helping me with all the legal matters regarding my father. She also assisted me in moving out. My boyfriend has been staying over because of what happened. My father has been blocked, but I've been receiving threatening emails. So that is that. It's both good and bad. Update 5. My father passed away in the midst of our lawsuit. After I was let out of the hospital, my mother and I got 2 amazing lawyers, one for the assault case and the other for the misappropriation of the money. The process for the child support case was quick. He had to pay back 50% of the money given to him in the past 3 years directly to me with no further fines. However, the assault case spiraled. It was found out that he was going to attempt to plead not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. He had detailed his plan to get away with this to his ex-girlfriend, who is not an awful person, who showed the police what she had with his girlfriend, leaving him owing a bunch of money, facing a hefty prison sentence, and having no more money to bail himself out. He deleted himself on Friday. I was numb the whole week, but today the realization washed over me. I am finally free. I don't have to look over my shoulder. I don't flinch when I hear footsteps, and I don't have anxiety while checking my phone. I am free. I am finally free.